All right, so this welcoming everybody to the AWS Well-Architected Webinar. Thank you to those who are still coming in. This will be recorded as we complete and will be shared with all registrants as well. Thank you much for representation from AWS for doing this with us today. Appreciate it. Getting on to the agenda for today.
Yep, so I'm just going to run through the agenda. I'm Dee, I do marketing for Fjorge. So for this webinar, I'm going to start off with some general housekeeping, and then we're going to introduce Joe and Rich, your panelists, and then we're going to dive into AWS, the Well-Architected Framework. We're going to do a deep dive of their 6 key pillars. And then lastly, we're going to wrap with how to scale and optimize within the cloud environment. And then we're going to leave 15 minutes in the end for any questions. But if you have any urgent questions while the webinar is going, feel free to drop them in the chat. I will be actively monitoring that throughout the webinar, and we'll try to get those answered. Otherwise, we do have 15 minutes carved out at the end. So I guess starting at 12:30 to answer any questions. And like Joe said, this webinar will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube and sent out to everybody after this webinar, as well as with some other resources. So expect to be seeing an email in your inbox later today.
Great. Dee, quick question. I know in the past we've had differences in the chat and the Q&A area to ask questions. Do you have a preference as to where folks are asking those? And will you be monitoring both of those locations?
I'll be monitoring both, so whatever's more.
Okay. Yeah, the chat goes to everybody, just so you know, which is fine. And then the Q&A just goes to the moderators so that we can see them. So feel free, anyone to put in either place, and Dee will monitor those and bring them up as needed. All right. Moving on, introductions. So my name is Joe Barsness. I am working at fjorge. I've been here for 9 years, and I lead our new business team. So I am representing folks that have a decent amount of knowledge about what AWS does, but not intimate knowledge about how all the technology works and those sorts of things. Here at fjorge, we have been using AWS for, well, I guess, probably 7 or 8 years as our preferred cloud hosting environment. And we have many certified individuals in different areas of AWS, and we manage 200 plus properties on the solution. So that is us. We'll do a little bit more about our organization in a moment, but I'm going to pass it over to my guest. Thank you, Rich, so much for joining us. If you'd like to do an introduction about you and what you do.
Absolutely. My name is Rich Boyd, and I've been at Amazon for 3.5 years now, which is in Amazon terms a lifetime. At Amazon, I sit on this team called the Well-Architected team. And my job, among many others, is to educate our customers on the benefits of using the Well-Architected framework, of conducting well-architected reviews, and how the Well-Architected framework can really help them accelerate their cloud adoption journey. I teach boot camps, I write blog posts, I speak at events like reInvent, webinars like this one, and just try to get the message out as far and wide as I can. So I'm happy to join fjorge today. I think it's going to be a great webinar.
Thank you, Rich. Jumping into our organizations as a whole. So the name of our organization, for those of you who don't know, is fjorge. We are a team of web and software developers based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And we build and maintain and monitor and all the things that we talk about today for many clients across the country and the world. So we're building anything from a marketing website that needs to be hosted in the cloud to very involved applications with many servers and geolocations and all of those sorts of application needs within AWS. We have worked in other cloud hosting platforms as well, but this is AWS is our go-to. We are also in some capacity a AWS partner. I know there's different levels and different pieces, and we've gone through the training and done all of that. So thank you so much to the team over there for setting us up for success. I think that's kind of the high level overview about fjorge, and then kind of passing it on to Rich. I know this is may want to get a little bit more into the area that you work in, but obviously everybody knows who AWS is, but talk a little bit more about AWS and Amazon is, but AWS and kind of what your team is aiming as a whole.
So Amazon Web Services is, in my opinion, the best cloud provider out there. That's why I chose to work here. I used, in a previous life before I came to Amazon, I used AWS as a DevOps engineer and a DevOps team lead extensively. But AWS is a cloud provider. We are your data center in the cloud with a whole lot more bells and whistles. So if you're looking to create something new, stand up a brand new application, a brand new architecture, AWS is your sandbox to do those things. And the way that we operate is it's a pay-as-you-go model. You only pay for the services you use, and you only pay when you use those services for the time you use them. So it's very cost effective if you kind of get in that mindset of using and building and designing and evolving on the cloud. So that's in a nutshell what Amazon Web Services is.
Great. Sorry, I jumped ahead a little bit. And so, you know, the things that I've learned about Rich, as you know, some of the training and some of my history is that there is just a lot going on to a novice user in the AWS environment. There's, you know, I think that there's good and bad, and that there's nothing you can't do in the cloud environment that I'm aware of with AWS as kind of a leader in the market. But then, you know, as I started to dig in a little bit deeper and trying to understand, like, okay, like on the highest level of an organization, like what do I need to know from a business perspective of how this is going to make it advantageous for us to use and us to use with our clients. And then I ran into this well-architected kind of process and theory, and it started to, you know, lay a little bit of groundwork for me on like things to think about, and then things that my team is doing on a daily basis. And so I'd love for you just to kind of start with, like, I have an idea, but start with how did this come about, and like what purpose does this serve here?
So Well-Architected started, and I'll go through this a little bit in a subsequent slide, kind of laying out the timeline, but really how Well-Architected started is it started by solutions architects at Amazon trying to understand if their customers were doing the right things in the cloud. You know, we wanted to answer the question, is my customer well architected? And in fact, at the time, our CEO for Amazon Web Services, Andy Jassy, pointed that out. He says, is this customer well architected? Are they implementing the right best practices? And that's really where the framework started. And so over the past almost 13, 14 years, we have slowly evolved and built out this framework. We've added tooling to it. We've evolved it. We're continuing to evolve it. And it really is the codification of the best practices for building things on the cloud. And so the kind of heart of Well-Architected are the 6 pillars. And we siloed things into pillars because they each have their own best practices. They each have their own philosophies. And there is a kind of tension between the pillars as well. So we start with operational excellence. And in operational excellence, we try to understand how you're delivering business value with your operations, with your workload, how your organization chooses what to go after, and how do you evolve your operations. Security is focused on securing not only the cloud and your resources in the cloud, but your users' data, your users' identity. Reliability is focused on your workload operating the way you think it should operate in different circumstances. So if it's under heavy load, it should operate one way. If it's in degraded mode, it should operate a different way. But you should know how your workload can reliably operate in those different modes. Performance efficiency is about selecting the right services and resources to deliver business value in the most performant, efficient way. And it may not be having the biggest EC2 instance or the biggest RDS instance out there, but knowing how big or how large you actually need to accomplish your business goals. Cost optimization is about paying what you need to pay to deliver business value to your customer, and just paying enough, right? So it's not necessarily about paying as little as possible, but it's about getting the bang for your buck that you need to deliver business value. And then we added the sustainability pillar, reinvent, this past year. And sustainability is focused on our impact to the world, our impact to our environment, and being carbon aware of how our architectural choices impact our carbon footprint. So that's really the 6 pillars in a nutshell.
Got it. You know, my question when I see this is like, it's not a pyramid, meaning that it's not you work towards one and you go to another. Like with somebody coming into the cloud and maybe choosing Amazon, and they may have some ideas of what's going on. Like, how do you tackle all of these things at once, or do you kind of like focus on a few and then double check the cost when you're done? I know you need to think about everything up front, but what advice do you give to people like that?
So if you want to start immersing yourself in the Well-Architected framework and learning the Well-Architected framework, there's a couple of starting places to go. The first, obviously, is the white paper itself. It's a bit of a lengthy read, but it's comprehensive. Each pillar has its own associated white paper that you can use for further study. There's also the Well-Architected tool, which is in the AWS console at no additional cost, and it will guide you through performing a well-architected review of your workload. And through that review process, you'll quickly see that it's teaching you those best practices as you go through that review. So I usually point people to the Well-Architected tool to kind of like quick start their journey. And if you are going to just focus on one pillar, and I'm biased, by the way, if you're going to focus on one pillar, I would focus on operational excellence first, because it's kind of the lodestar for the framework. Like what we cover in operational excellence sets the table for a lot of the other pillars. And operational excellence is super focused on how your organization designs and builds and evolves in the cloud, and how you structure your operations and your workload to understand its state. So that's, if you have to start at one pillar, I would start at operational excellence.
Great.
So this is a kind of a brief timeline of Well-Architected. As I said in the beginning, Well-Architected started around 2012, trying to understand how our customers are implementing best practice in the cloud, you know, if they're truly well-architected or not. In 2013, that evolved into our solutions architects actually conducting well-architected reviews of their customers. In 2014, we put the questions across the 4 pillars. In 2015, we published the framework. In 2016, we added the operational excellence pillar, and we made that the first pillar in the framework. In 2017, we added the AP and partner competency for Well-Architected, and we added lenses. So a lens is additional well-architected guidance about a specific industry, like finance or healthcare, or a specific technology type, like serverless. In 2018, we added the Well-Architected tool, as well as improvement plans on how to implement best practices. In 2019, we launched globally. In 2020, we did a massive update to the framework. We added more best practices, more questions, and we added more lenses and an API. And then in 2021, we added the sustainability pillar, additional lenses, and we also added a feature called custom question sets. So that's kind of the history of Well-Architected. And as you can see, it's a constantly evolving, growing framework. Like we're never done with Well-Architected. We're constantly learning from our customers and from the way that we build new services, what best practices are emergent and what best practices we need to incorporate further into the framework.
Got it. And I don't suppose I can put you on the spot and ask you what 2022 is going to bring.
I can't say publicly what 2022 is going to bring, but we do have several major releases that will be happening soon and throughout the year.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, I guess maybe the point is looking forward to seeing what's next
Absolutely.
in this world. Great. And thank you for going through that history. And so again, you as a team are working with your customers to inform where this is going and where this is headed, correct?
Absolutely. These best practices weren't built in a vacuum. A lot of them started with the way that we built Amazon.com and the way that we started Amazon Web Services. But then as our customers started building on top of our platform and really doing like interesting and novel things and using services in ways that we hadn't even anticipated, those best practices started to emerge. So we're not only learning from ourselves, we're learning from our customers constantly.
Got it. Cool. So now we've learned about like what these, what well-architected is, what the 6 pillars are. We've got a history. So, the question that I have, and I made a slide about it, is why? The why. What do we have against competitors? What is Amazon, best in the world at? And how does the Architect framework kind of support that theory?
So our belief, and we have customer testimonials that show this, that if you adopt the well-architected framework, that you're going to build and deploy things on the cloud faster. You're going to get to market faster. Fundamentally, the difference between running and owning a data center and running in the cloud is night and day. The same business processes and procedures that you use in the data center, those aren't applicable in the cloud sometimes, or they have to evolve to work in the cloud. So if you adopt the best practices for building, operating, and evolving on the cloud, we firmly believe that your time to market is going to increase. We also know that you're going to lower or mitigate your risks. The well-architected framework is a guided question process. It makes you think about your architectural choices, how you're designing your workload. It makes you, peek around corners to what's going to come next. So by doing so, by going through that guided process, you're going to have to answer some pretty tough questions and think a couple of steps ahead in the game. It also means that you're going to be making informed decisions, because at the end of the day, the well-architected framework is going to give you knowledge that you didn't have before, give you ideas that you didn't have before about how to do things on the cloud and about how trade-offs work. You can have a highly reliable application on Amazon Web Services, but it's going to increase your cost to do so, because you're going to have multi-AZ or even multi-region architectures. Versus if you want to be the fastest out there, that also might cost you more money and might come at the expense of security or reliability, right? Everything's about trade-offs in the cloud. And so we know that with the well-architected framework, you're going to make informed decisions about those trade-offs. And then finally, most importantly, it's a learning framework. It's a way to learn those best practices for building, operating, evolving on the cloud. And that's what my biggest takeaway is from the well-architected framework. I wish that I knew about it before I came to Amazon. It would have made my life a whole lot easier when I was building and deploying on AWS. And I firmly in my heart believe it is the best framework out there for doing things in the cloud.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the overview. I think my team certainly agrees. So that's a good sign. And it is a very flexible speed to market from experience. And I think the best thing for fjorge is that it's a trusted partner, in that it's used by many. It's simple to add resources and people with experience in that world, and you can really gain some momentum by doing that. So it's been a great experience for ourselves as well. I know this is going to be a challenge, but we did talk about how to scale and optimize the AWS cloud environment. I know that could be probably multiple people's jobs to do that. So let's try and get through it in 5 minutes. I'm sure you're capable of it. Rich, but like just setting off, you know, the cloud environment and what the best practices are and how to think about the different pillars and how they relate to each other. You know, what are you hearing and what are you seeing in your industry about what customers are liking?
So the use of AWS has evolved over time. When AWS first started, an AWS account was associated with a customer, right? We believed that a customer would have an AWS account. And over time, that's not proven to be the case. We now find that customers have multiple AWS accounts. Some of our bigger customers have thousands of AWS accounts. So if you're first starting on AWS, what you want to really look into and think about is how you're going to scale and grow your account topology over time. That's like the first thing to really get your kind of arms around. So I would recommend that you start with one AWS account, start simple, and then make that your root or centralized account. We have services like Control Tower that you can use to manage multiple accounts and AWS organizations that you can use to manage multiple accounts. But think about how you're going to use an account and multiple accounts. Most of our customers use different accounts for different applications, and they use accounts for different environments, like your pre-prod, your QA environment, or your production environment. So that's kind of like the first thing that you want to think about and game plan out as you're starting. The next thing that you want to think about is how you're going to secure your accounts, right? You don't want everybody to have access to everything. So thinking about how you're going to use IAM, our identity and access management service, and how you're going to scope the user access for things in the cloud is really, really important. You're never going to do things right the first time, and there is no ideal right state. Your workload, your architecture is going to evolve over time as your business grows, as your requirements change. So understanding that there is no like perfect, well-architected state to achieve. It's just a continual journey towards an ideal state. So don't feel out of sorts or feel bad about, you know, the architecture choices that you've made. Know that they're just kind of a step on the road to that ideal state. Another challenge at Amazon Web Services for people that are new to it is we have a lot of services. We have over 200 services in Amazon Web Services. We have a service for pretty much any computational need out there. So really kind of dipping your toe in the water and starting to understand those different services. For instance, in databases alone, we have 8 different database services. And those services are designed for different read and write access requirements and different data type requirements. Most people start off with RDS, which is just a good general purpose choice, and they might run some EC2 instances. I always recommend that customers start looking down the road towards container-based workloads or serverless workloads, because that's where you really get the most bang for your buck in the cloud. So if you think about it, if you're paying to run an EC2 instance 24 hours a day, you're paying for when it's being used and not being used. A quick way to save some money is you can actually use Systems Manager, another one of our services, to turn that EC2 instance off, say when no customers are around or when it doesn't need to be used, and then turn it back on when the demand comes back or when the user needs it. And thereby, you're not paying for that instance when you don't need to. Starting to think that way about your resources in the cloud is a key to really unlocking the potential and cost savings as well.
Got it. So that comes into, you know, one of the pillars, right, is managing those costs. And so you didn't make a bad decision by starting with EC2 and RDS, but as you're growing and your application is growing and maybe using more resources, you can benefit more and more from digging deeper into these 200 different services that can help with those things.
Absolutely.
I know from my perspective, like I've been kind of sitting side by side with a solutions architect or a sysadmin who logs in and does these things, and I just get overwhelmed, right? But that person who's dealing with it regularly knows what they're doing, how they're trying to do it, and what next step they're trying to do in this well-architected framework to utilize those services to get to the end goal. But yes, it is overwhelming when you first log in. But that's also why we like it, because there is so many options to solve each problem that comes up as you grow and you have different needs, both for yourself or for your clients, right?
Absolutely. Another really cool thing that we've published that's out there in the wild and on the internet is what we call the AWS Solutions Library. And the Solutions Library has three big components. The first is the solutions references, which are white papers about different architectural patterns that we've discovered and evolved for our customers. The next is the solutions constructs, which show you how to hook different AWS services together. And then finally, we have the solutions reference implementations, which are how to build architecture in the cloud. So these are CloudFormation-backed templates. They're public GitHub repositories. And you can go to these and see how to build something on the cloud, right? Like what a fully fledged architecture looks like on the cloud, and you can even run it in your own AWS account. So if you're just kind of getting started and wanting to see what are some of the things that I could build or how I would build my business in the cloud, the Solutions Library is a great place to start.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. It was going to be one of my questions for the Q&A, is like, where do you start with all of this? So you've gone ahead and answered that already for us. And I know there's some white papers, and there's, Googling the AWS Well-Architected Framework will set you well on your journey to do that. And then the other one that I picked up both from you and internally is that tool that's the well-architected tool that will kind of help you, check early and often, I'm assuming, is kind of the theory there, correct?
Absolutely. In a perfect world, you would conduct a well-architected review on your workload. And then over time, as you update that workload, as architectural choices are made for that workload, you would go back to that review and update that review, and it'd be a continuous improvement process with the tool.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, thanks. That seems to make sense as to where people can start to go to learn more. And I guess here's another question for you that, just in case some of our clients or folks that are on this call, where do you go to sign up for AWS? I imagine I could Google it, but it seems, do I talk to a salesperson? Do I just go sign up for an account? It's kind of like, what do you want somebody to typically do first if they're going to say, I'm going to investigate this on my own without involving a consultant or something like that?
You can just go to aws.amazon.com and sign up right there, right? If you're brand new to AWS, start your own account. Most of our services have what we call a free tier, or they're eligible for the free tier. So if you use the service under an amount, or you use a certain instance size, it is free to use to the public. So you can actually play around with AWS with the free tier and just kind of get your feet wet in that process. And if you want to then kind of make the leap into AWS, you could start a new account with your corporate email, corporate credit card, et cetera, and start from there. Most of our customers kind of start on their own, and then they'll actually spin up a proper corporate account to go from. But you can use AWS without talking to a partner, without talking to a sales rep, without talking to an account manager or solutions architect. It's open to the public.
Perfect. Thank you. Moving on to some Q&A. I know we have at least a question or two that we have here. But if anybody else, please send in those questions either in the chat or the Q&A. I really like this one. I'm not sure that I think maybe both sides should answer this, just because we might both have some experience. But I see, what is a day in the life of an associate solutions architect like in AWS? And can you shed some light on that? I certainly can shed some light on that as well.
So at Amazon Web Services, there are many, many flavors of solutions architects. So we have solutions architects that are devoted to helping a customer or several customers evolve their architectures and implement architectures in the cloud. We have other special solutions architects that are specialist solutions architects. So they're subject matter experts in a certain technology or even in a certain AWS service. And they will work with customers that need to implement something that's kind of beyond the skills of a generalist SA, or they may need a deeper level of technical support or understanding. We also have solutions architects that support our partners out there that help them gain certification in different AWS partner programs and make sure that their partners are successful. So there's not just one type of solutions architect at AWS, there's many types. But where most people start is in the associate or the general solutions architect category. And that's where they are meeting with several customers or maybe one large customer and really helping them to grow and adopt the AWS platform.
Got it. Cool. And this question did say, what is a day in the life of an associate solutions architect? So maybe that's more of that position that they were curious about. So in case they were going the angle that I was thinking about is like, what does somebody who's managing either an internal application or client applications do in AWS on a daily basis? And I'm hoping that, the things that I've seen from that perspective with our solutions architects or system administrators is just like work investigating solutions, investigating problems, and investigating opportunities. And then digging into best practices, figuring out how that's going to affect all the other things that they've done in the environment, and then doing the process of releasing that process, whether that's like a code change that's dev or, dev staging live, or whether that's, trying a different instance of a server or serverless. You're always going to go through those checks and balances before you make it live. And so that is what a typical solutions architect is doing. Now, I'm also going to answer the other question that I would have is like, what does a sysadmin do in these things on a daily basis? So our systems administrators are folks that kind of manage these instances in a live way. So they're dealing with, migrations possibly from one client to another, or one area to another, or non-cloud to cloud, or from a competitor to AWS. So they're doing those things, and then they're monitoring a lot. So they're the ones that's, pull up dashboards and review, where servers are peaking, what things, and they're looking for things to make day-to-day improvements, maybe for a sale or a spike in traffic that was unanticipated. And then they might be working in AWS if somebody's under a DDoS attack or something like that. And all of those things, they're utilizing the different tools and monitoring and setting up alerts and like, all of that. And then what you talked about too is just like our overall structure of our AWS environment, right, as a whole. So we have a master account, but then we also have these, and I don't know the correct term, Rich, maybe you can correct me, but like sub accounts for our clients so that they're easy to transfer and all of that sort of a thing. So that's kind of what, the folks on our team that are in AWS are doing on a daily basis. I know if you have an internal application, it's just really about, at the end of the day, it's about improving the well-architected framework, because that's what's going to set you up for success.
Absolutely.
I know we have a few more minutes for questions. Keep sending them in. I don't see any on the list at the moment, Dee. Chime in if there are any. Otherwise, I have one that I wanted to ask Rich as well.
Yeah, it looks like Rich is working on one, but someone asked for the top 3 websites you would recommend to improve cloud system design skills.
Yeah, and I commented on those. That's the AWS Solutions Library that I mentioned, the well-architected kind of core content site. And then the last one is the Builders Library. So the Builders Library is really in-depth technical documentation on how we have built things at scale at Amazon. So if you really want to see like what goes into building services on AWS, or how we've built things, or how we've, what the philosophy behind those things is, the Builders Library is a very deeply immersive set of white papers and articles to kind of really dive into how we do things at Amazon.
To go along with that, Rich, I know that our team has done a number of certifications and those sorts of things where, let's say I was gonna, I have a small team, I'm starting an application, I'm choosing to use AWS. What types of certification things should I be thinking about?
So we have a whole smorgasbord of certification programs at Amazon.
Sure.
Right. I personally would recommend starting, for anybody technical, getting started with Amazon Web Services, is starting with the Solutions Architect Associate certification. It is the general purpose, basic how to build on the cloud, how to build on AWS certification. That is kind of the entryway for everybody. That's where I would start. There's also a certified cloud practitioner, and that's great. It's a step below the Solutions Architect Associate, but it's great for business leaders, key decision makers, executives, to really understand how the cloud is different from traditional data center operations, and what are some of the benefits and abilities you get with moving to the cloud. So for key executives, decision makers, et cetera, I always recommend the certified cloud practitioner.
Got it. Perfect. Yeah, and I'm sure there's lots to learn and discover. I was on a call the other day with all the certifications and the process and the options and all of that. So just trying to give an idea of where to go first for those that don't know. The question that I had as I was reading, this is kind of specific, but getting into myself reading some of the Well-Architected Framework over the past couple of weeks, is there was this section that's called a distributed system design. And I was curious if it was under the reliability pillar. And I was curious if that meant location distribution or some other sort of setup that I just haven't heard of or seen yet.
So distributed system design kind of falls in line with a microservices architecture, right? So there's two general ways to build an application. There's a monolith, where all the application logic and functions are inside of one large executable or one large code base. And the opposite of that is microservices, where those specific key pieces of business logic or functions are in their own smaller services, and those services are composed into a larger user experience or to deliver business value. And so when we think about distributed systems design inside of Amazon Web Services, we always kind of recommend a microservices approach to architecture choice. And then within Amazon Web Services, we want you to spread your workload, spread your application across multiple availability zones. So inside of Amazon Web Services, we have what we call availability zones and regions. A region is a geographic location in a part of a country. And within a region, we have several data centers or availability zones. And so one of our recommendations is that you would spread your workload across multiple availability zones. So not have all your instances in one availability zone, have them spread out across multiple availability zones, so that if something happens to one availability zone, your application can still perform and deliver business value, right? And then if your application needs to be global in nature, you could actually spin up copies of that application in other regions so that your workload is closer to your customers.
Yep. Perfect. Yeah, that's what I've seen done before. I was curious if it was talking about that or something different. So thank you so much for doing that. Dee, any other questions? I know we're kind of coming up on time here. Goal was to make this completed in 45 minutes. So any other questions before we kind of wrap up?
I'm not seeing any other questions. I think we're good to wrap.
All right. So I think, next steps, if anybody has any questions, certainly reach out to us here at Fjorge, and we can kind of be a first hit. Obviously, check out all the resources at AWS as well. Rich, thank you so much for doing this. You not only have informed me, I'm sure you've informed many others at our organization and the guests on this show. So thank you so much for doing this. And thanks, Dee, for setting all of this up. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And thanks everybody for joining. We wish you the best of luck in your AWS journey.
Thanks, everybody.